That same Steve, he's still that, but now you're also seeing another side of him that he never had to show.
Interesting things, and I think about this all the time, is from the time Bernie passed till now, certainly I think society has changed, the way they digest entertainment has changed. So I think it would have been difficult. I think a lot of people would have had a hard time with some of the things.
I'm telling people you work with, I don't want you even to be next to me. Like, I have such disdain for you that I'm annoyed by your...
From Hollywood royalty to the center of a brewing storm, Steve Harvey's image is taking serious hits, and this time, it's coming from the very comedians who once praised him as a legend. It's wild how fast the internet can flip a legacy. 1 minute, you're the motivational king of comedy, preaching success and faith on TV, and the next, your name is trending with words like exposed, fake, and betrayal. Let's be real. Steve Harvey has always been that polished figure, the guy with the clean suit, perfect smile, and rehearsed confidence. But now, people are starting to peel back the layers, and what they're finding underneath isn't as shiny as his TV image. This isn't just another celebrity scandal. It's a full-on reckoning from the comedy world that helped build him. The irony? The same stage that crowned him might be the one that dethrones him. Because when comedians, people known for loyalty to the craft, start calling you out, that's not drama, that's a red flag waving in 4K. And the internet? Oh, it's eating this up. TikTok edits of old Steve interviews are blowing up. Reddit threads are connecting timelines. Fans are pulling receipts like it's tax season. Everyone's asking the same question. Was Steve really the self-made king he claimed to be, or just Hollywood's smoothest illusionist? But that's not even the wild part. Because as more comedians start talking, it's becoming clear this isn't just a few bitter voices. It's a pattern, and what they're revealing could rewrite everything we thought we knew about Steve Harvey. But buckle up, because what happens next might just change how you see one of TV's most beloved faces forever.
TV talk show. Okay, this was the one he had on NBC just recently. Whatever, yeah. The one that damn, who took his show from him? Kelly Clarkson. How can Kelly Clarkson?
And that right there hits deep. Because it's true. The comedy world Steve Harvey came up in is long gone. Back then, being raw, loud, and unfiltered was the whole point. But now, that same energy gets you canceled before the punchline even lands. The shift didn't just hurt Steve, it exposed him. The man built his fame on being bold and unapologetic. But in today's climate, that same attitude doesn't translate the same way. The world got softer, and Steve didn't adjust fast enough. Behind the scenes, fellow comedians say they saw this coming years ago. The jokes that once made audiences roar now make networks nervous. And when a comedian stops being funny to protect his brand, that's when the cracks start to show. It's not that Steve lost his talent. He lost touch with the people. The same tell-it-like-it-is charisma that made him famous now feels outdated, even forced. And it's left fans wondering, has Steve Harvey become a relic of his own success? From stadium tours to game shows, he reinvented himself over and over. But you can't rebrand authenticity. You either have it or you don't. And now, as more comedians start speaking out, it's starting to feel like Steve isn't being attacked. He's being exposed.
The same guy who rails against people who don't believe in his particular voodoo.
Right? Against gay people.
Against gay people, against age.
And that's where the story starts to twist. Because this isn't just about jokes anymore. This is about control. About how the same man who once said, "I don't care what people think," suddenly became a master of walking on eggshells. Steve Harvey's entire rise was built on saying what others were too afraid to say. But as the years went by, that fearless voice turned cautious, filtered, corporate. The Steve we see now isn't the raw, hungry comedian from the 90s. He's the brand, the empire, the smile that never cracks, even when the internet does. But deep down, the old Steve is still in there. The one who'd roast anyone in the room, no apologies. And that's exactly why comedians are speaking up. They're not just calling him out for being out of touch. They're saying he betrayed the art form, that he switched sides the moment the money got too good to risk. And that's where it stings the most. Because Bernie Mack, Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hewley, these men were more than peers. They were brothers. And some insiders say, ever since Bernie's passing, Steve's tone changed. He became more polished, more cautious, more disconnected. The comedy world started to feel like it lost one of its own, not because Steve quit comedy, but because comedy quit him. So when comedians say he wouldn't survive in today's sensitive culture, maybe they're not just talking about society. Maybe they're talking about Steve himself, a man trying to play it safe in a world that no longer plays fair.
You go on the air and you said, my sister done burnt too many bridges, and there's nothing I can do for her now. Steve, do you know how hurt?
Steve, my thing with Steve Harvey is that he used my material on both his platforms.
Yeah.
After I talked to him, I saw him at Def Jam, I went up and talked to him, I said, man, you're using my...
And that's the brutal truth right there. Comedy used to be about punchlines, not punching up hashtags. What used to be an art form has turned into a digital minefield where one joke can end your entire career before breakfast. Back in the day, comedians like Steve Harvey thrived on shock value. They were supposed to ruffle feathers. It was their superpower. But now, every crowd has a phone, every moment has a hashtag, and every laugh has a disclaimer. You don't just tell a joke anymore. You submit it for social approval. And the irony? Some of the same fans who once praised Steve for keeping it real are now the same ones waiting to cancel him for it. That's the toxic cycle of modern fame. The internet builds you up just to break you in high definition. But here's what makes it worse. Steve knows this. He's one of the few who made it from the raw club stages to mainstream daytime television. And with that success came something darker. The constant fear of slipping, of saying one wrong line that ends decades of work. So when his peers say he's lost his edge, maybe it's not fearlessness that's gone, maybe it's freedom. Because the louder cancel culture got, the quieter Steve became. And that's where the conversation turns. Because this isn't just about Steve's jokes, it's about what happens when comedy stops being comedy and turns into crisis management. But don't move yet, because what comes next isn't just awkward. It's career-shaking.
About the first wife, you forget that? You told us it was her, then you went and married somebody else that think like a man. Like, what are you talking about? They think they can rewrite history.
And that right there is the plot twist nobody saw coming. The same aggressive comedy that made Steve a legend is now labeled as problematic. The internet flipped the script, and overnight, savage humor became emotional damage. You've got to remember, back in Steve's prime, roasting was a badge of honor. If he clowned you on stage, it meant you made it. You were part of the show. But now, one sharp joke, and Twitter threads start forming like FBI case files. Screenshots, hashtags, think pieces, all over a punchline that once had crowds crying with laughter. One fan wrote, Steve Harvey in 1999 would have been banned by 2025. Another said, we didn't survive the Kings of Comedy era just to see y'all get offended over everything. The internet can't decide if it wants raw truth or safe entertainment, but it will crucify you for picking the wrong one. And for Steve, that's the catch-22 of his entire brand. The world loved him because he said what everyone was thinking, but now he's punished for the same thing. The man didn't change. The internet did. And behind closed doors, comedians are whispering the same thing, that Steve's silence isn't about growth, it's about survival. He's learned that being real doesn't pay like being safe. But here's the kicker. Fans can feel it. They miss the chaos, the raw edge, the man who didn't flinch. Because when comedy loses its danger, it loses its soul. And Steve Harvey, whether he admits it or not, is standing right on that edge, between legend and liability. But hold up. This next part? It's where the drama really hits home.
That's not his story. Steve Harvey wasn't never homeless. When Mark Curry was touring with him 25 years ago, he was making $3,000 a show in cash and doing 5 shows a week. They just tell the stories. Thanks to my wife, I'm where I am.
And there it is, the death of spontaneity. What used to be a comedian's magic trick, that off-the-cuff genius, has now become a liability. Imagine being funny for a living, but terrified of being too funny. This is what Steve's peers are talking about, the quiet paranoia that lives in every green room now. Comedians used to test material in real time, feeding off the energy of the crowd. Now, they're second-guessing every word, every pause, every punchline, because one clip can ruin your entire legacy before the night's over. It's no longer about whether a joke lands, it's about whether it survives the algorithm. The crowd isn't your audience anymore. It's the comment section. And Steve Harvey, of all people, knows this pain. He's built an empire on being unfiltered. Radio shows, talk shows, stand-up stages. But in a world where everyone's waiting to go viral off your downfall, being authentic feels like a trap. Fans online have even coined a term for it, the Steve Harvey paradox. You can't be the same man who built his career off brutal honesty and then play safe once the spotlight turns harsh. That's not evolution, that's survival mode. And as much as Steve's trying to adapt, the cracks are starting to show. His interviews feel rehearsed, his jokes feel cautious. The man who once owned the mic now looks like he's afraid of it. But here's where things start to spiral. Because this fear didn't just silence Steve. It might have cost him something much bigger than his edge.
Somebody called me and said, man, homeboy doing your material. So he did my whole Halloween run. And I know he didn't think of it. You know, this is true stuff that really happened to me. And so my thing is, you don't have to do that, homeboy. Yeah. So, you know, motherfucker, you made enough money.
And there it is, the turning point nobody wants to admit. When Bernie Mack died, something in Steve Harvey did too. The Kings of Comedy weren't just a tour, they were a brotherhood. Bernie was the wildfire, Steve was the strategist. Together, they balanced each other. But when Bernie was gone, the fire dimmed, and Steve leaned into the empire instead. He started chasing TV contracts, endorsements, image management. Don't get me wrong, that's the natural evolution of a successful man. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The higher Steve climbed, the safer he got. He went from roasting crowds in smoky clubs to reading scripts on national television. From, I said what I said, to, let's take a break for our sponsors. Bernie represented everything Steve used to be. Fearless, unpredictable, real. So when fans say Steve changed, maybe it's not jealousy, maybe it's grief. Grief for the version of him that used to burn bright before Hollywood smoothed out the edges. Even comedians whisper it backstage. Steve's transformation wasn't about maturing, it was about managing his image, his brand, his legacy. And in that process, he stopped managing what made him iconic, his truth. So when fans look at him now, the suits, the perfect smile, the motivational speeches, they're not seeing the king of comedy. They're seeing a man haunted by the ghost of who he used to be. And the internet? It doesn't let ghosts rest. Because what happens next proves that no matter how high you rise, the past always finds a way to trend again.
Because we feel for each other, because we know the real person.
Right, yeah.
I know they lying about you online. I know that podcast is bullshit. Hanging that dog, don't pay no attention to that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and look, man, just because you can talk smooth without saying, it don't mean you ain't lying.
Right.
I be sitting up here looking at these podcasts of these other comedians that's going on talking about other comedians. Hold up, dog. Where did that shit come from? When did we become that? When did we get into tear each other down business? Because you ain't never heard me say not a disparaging remark against another comedian nowhere. You ain't heard him or him. Because we ain't cut from that cloth.
Right.
So what is your motive for doing this here?
That line hits harder than most people realize, because it exposes the real trap behind fame. Once you make it mainstream, your authenticity becomes a brand, not a personality. You're no longer allowed to just be you, you're a product. And for Steve Harvey, that shift was both his biggest win and his biggest curse. Family Feud made him a household name, sure, but it also turned him into a corporation. Every facial expression, every punchline, every meme monetized and magnified. And that raw, unfiltered Steve, he got buried somewhere between sponsorship deals and PR-approved scripts. Fans see it too. One comment said, "You can literally see Steve bite his tongue mid-sentence. The old him would have gone off." Another joked, "Family Feud Steve and King of Comedy Steve are two different people living in one body." And that's not hate, that's heartbreak. Because we watched a man who once owned the stage now shrink into a format. He traded crowd roars for audience applause signs. That's not evolution, that's censorship dressed up as growth. But what's wild is how self-aware Steve seems to be about it. Every so often, you'll see flashes of that old fire, like he wants to speak freely again, but can't. It's like he's stuck in a loop between the man he is and the brand he built. And that brings us to the real controversy. Because what happened next didn't just question his authenticity, it made everyone wonder if Steve Harvey has officially sold out.
So we had a national TV show. Bernie Mack was the it comedian at the time, and then DL was hot. He had a TV. But the first year we did it, it was just me, Bernie, and just me, Bernie, and Steve.
Right.
And Steve closed.
You did the first part, the second part.
I think, of course, and that was, definitely a contributor.
And that's the dagger. Because beneath all the headlines, the suits, and the smiles, that's the real issue. Steve Harvey didn't just lose the crowd, he lost the connection. Every legend reaches that crossroad, when being perfect becomes the biggest flaw of all. You can tell Steve's still trying to inspire, to motivate, to teach. But the internet doesn't want perfection. It wants proof you're human. And the moment you hide that, the audience checks out. It's almost poetic. The man who built his career telling brutal truths now feels too polished to believe. One fan even said, "Steve used to make me laugh because he was real. Now he just sounds like an AI version of himself." Brutal? Yes, but also kind of true. The tragedy here isn't that Steve got rich or successful, it's that the rawness that made him relatable got filtered out by fame. Every story, every scandal, every inspirational clip feels like a brand strategy instead of a soul speaking, and the comedy world notices. Behind the scenes, people are asking, did Steve outgrow comedy or did comedy outgrow Steve? Because if you think about it, the man who once laughed at the world now looks like he's afraid of it. But here's the twist. This conversation isn't just about Steve. It's about every creator, comedian, and celebrity walking that same tightrope today. How far can you go before your truth becomes too risky to say out loud? Steve Harvey's journey has always been wrapped in the language of success. Clean suits, bright smiles, powerful speeches about faith, family, and hard work. To the public, he's the man who turned struggle into triumph, a symbol of perseverance and self-belief. But behind that polished exterior lies a story far more complicated, filled with whispers, broken bonds, and the voices of comedians who say the price of Steve's empire wasn't paid in money, it was paid in loyalty. Because what the world saw as confidence, some saw as control. What the world celebrated as hustle, others called manipulation. And now, those old wounds are beginning to open, revealing a version of Steve Harvey few were ready to see. Behind every laugh, there's a shadow. Behind every success story, there's a cost. For Steve, that cost seems to have been trust, from the people who helped shape his path to the ones who now question if his climb to the top was ever fair. The story of Steve Harvey isn't just about comedy, it's about power, who has it, how they use it, and what they're willing to lose to keep it. From the late nights in small clubs to television stardom, Steve built his brand on being the everyman, a preacher of self-made success. Yet as the years went by, those close to him started noticing a pattern. He wasn't just chasing success, he was protecting it at all costs. And sometimes, those costs came in the form of people. Friends turned strangers, allies turned critics, comedians turned enemies. In the entertainment world, reputation is everything. You can lose a job and bounce back. But once your peers stop trusting you, that stain never fades. And when comedians like Mark Curry and Cat Williams started speaking out, fans began to see cracks in the foundation. These weren't random accusations from outsiders. These were men who had shared stages, studios, and experiences with Steve. Men who claimed they saw the real version of him, the one hidden behind the motivational quotes and the bright studio lights. Mark Curry's story still stings for many in the comedy community. He wasn't just accusing Steve of copying a joke. He said Steve took a piece of his life, a personal childhood story, and made it part of his act without credit. That wasn't just theft, that was betrayal. And when Mark said he confronted Steve only to be brushed off, it painted a picture of a man untouchable by accountability. Then there's the tension with Bernie Mack, a name that still echoes in the halls of comedy greatness. Bernie was the people's king, the raw, unfiltered truth-teller who made you laugh because you felt his struggle. To hear that Steve allegedly tried to undercut Bernie for a movie role shook fans to their core, because for many, Bernie represented loyalty and authenticity, qualities they thought Steve also stood for. When Bernie passed away, Steve's tributes were seen by some as self-serving, more about keeping his own image clean than honoring a friend. And that moment became symbolic. It wasn't about Bernie anymore. It was about the kind of man Steve Harvey wanted the world to believe he was, and the kind of man people behind the scenes said he really was. Monique's fallout with Steve added fuel to the fire. When she stood for integrity and refused to play the Hollywood game, she expected support from someone who had always spoken about faith and principles. Instead, Steve told her on national television that this wasn't about integrity, it was about money. To him, survival meant compromise. To her, it meant selling out. That conversation went viral because it was a rare glimpse into the trade-offs that define fame. It was the mask slipping. Steve's words that day revealed the blueprint he lived by. You can't help the poor if you're one of them. It sounded like wisdom, but to many, it felt cold. It told the world that to Steve, power and influence mattered more than truth and unity. That philosophy might explain how he's managed to stay on top for so long, and why so many of his peers eventually walked away. Hollywood rewards survival, not sincerity. Steve mastered that rule. Every controversy, from the Miss Universe mistake to public backlash over his comments, became a stepping stone. He knew how to turn embarrassment into exposure, failure into opportunity. Most people would crumble after announcing the wrong winner on live TV. Steve came back stronger, hosting the same pageant the next year, joking about it, owning the narrative before anyone else could. That wasn't luck, it was calculation. But that same skill, that ability to control every situation, is exactly what people say makes him dangerous. Because when someone knows how to twist every downfall into an advantage, it raises the question, do they ever feel remorse? Or is every moment just another move in the game? Behind the charm, Steve Harvey is known to run his empire with precision and dominance. Former employees describe his work environment as tense, structured, and cold. One wrong word could mean the end of your job. To them, he wasn't the inspirational mentor fans saw on screen. He was the boss who demanded perfection without compassion. In comedy, relationships are currency. The connections you build determine how far you go. But for Steve, it seemed those relationships were only valuable when they served his climb. Once the purpose was fulfilled, the connection faded. That's why so many people now say, Steve doesn't keep friends, he keeps opportunities. Still, no one can deny his work ethic. The man's grind is unmatched. He built himself up from nothing, turned rejection into resilience, and created a career that most could only dream of. But somewhere along the way, that drive became armor, protecting him from criticism, emotion, or loyalty. Because when your entire image is built on perfection, admitting fault isn't an option. Even now, as more comedians step forward with stories, Steve remains silent. No public statements, no direct responses, just smiles and success, as if none of it touches him. It's almost like he knows something the rest of them don't, that Hollywood doesn't punish those who stay useful. And that's the part that hits hardest for fans. Because Steve Harvey's empire is built on the idea of authenticity, faith, and redemption. Yet the stories surrounding him sound more like a man who mastered the illusion of all three. A man who learned how to preach humility while practicing control. As the years pass, the legacy he's built becomes harder to separate from the accusations that follow him. The laughter that once defined his career now carries an echo of suspicion. Each resurfaced interview, each clip from Mark Curry or Cat Williams, adds another layer to a story that refuses to stay buried. But maybe that's the irony of success. The higher you climb, the more the world demands to know what your ladder was built on. And in Steve Harvey's case, that ladder might be made of more than just ambition. It might be built on other people's sacrifices. Still, he continues to dominate. Game shows, radio, motivational tours, and television appearances. His audience remains loyal, his image untarnished to many. But fame is temporary, and truth is patient. As time goes on, the question isn't whether Steve Harvey will fall, it's what will happen when the people who helped him rise decide they've had enough of staying silent. The comedy world has a long memory. Legends like Bernie Mack left behind more than laughter. They left principles. Cat Williams, despite his controversies, continues to speak truth to power. Monique, despite being blackballed, refuses to back down. And through all of that, Steve Harvey stands at the center, the one man who managed to survive every storm, yet can't seem to escape his past. Because in the end, power protects you until it doesn't. And when that day comes, the stories you thought were buried start to rise with a vengeance. Every borrowed joke, every cut tie, every quiet betrayal finds its way back to the surface. That's the price of control. You can silence people for a while, but you can't silence history. The story of Steve Harvey isn't over. It's evolving. Each new voice adds another truth, another perspective. And whether you see him as a self-made icon or a ruthless strategist, one thing's for sure. His name will forever carry weight in both the boardrooms and the backrooms of comedy. Because at the end of the day, the real question isn't whether Steve Harvey made it to the top. It's what and who it cost him to stay there. So what do you think? Did Steve Harvey evolve, or did he sell out? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this debate is far from over. And don't go anywhere. Click the next video you see on your screen for even more juicy celebrity chaos, betrayals, and stories Hollywood doesn't want you to know. See you in the next one.